Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Recha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the 28th chapter. As you can see in the subheading, Ephraim's captivity predicted. And keeping in mind, the book of Isaiah, as you read it, the events, right, in each chapter, they're not really organized in chronological order. They seem to be grouped more in like sort of a thematic order, right, based on the topic or the theme of what Isaiah is speaking of. So you'll notice there might be some preceding chapters that describe events that took place, say like post the captivity of the Northern Kingdom, but then as you go into subsequent chapters, Isaiah is mentioning things or addressing the Northern Kingdom. So just keep that in mind when you go from chapter to chapter, right? The book is not composed entirely in a chronological order. So this is Isaiah chapter 28, verse 1. Woe to the crowd or the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower. So this crown of pride, right, which the crown, when you think of a crown, you think of like a high, position, right? And Ephraim here, or Samaria, is being described as the crown of pride, as in to say like the top, okay, or they're very proud and arrogant in this wickedness that they are doing. Basically, nobody can tell them anything. To the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower. Now, as it mentions the drunkards, and we go in the subsequent verses, the drink, the strong drink, the wine, the drink, it's not necessarily literal, okay, but a representation of them being influenced by a different doctrine or philosophy or way of life other than what the Lord has given us, right? So they're referred to as drunkards here for that reason, whose glorious beauty is as a fading flower, right? So at one point, Ephraim being fruitful, Isaiah here is describing them to be now at the point of like a flower that's withering away. And this is because they started to delve heavily into idolatry and, wickedness that they continued in, right? Iniquity upon iniquity, which are on the head of the fat valleys. The word fat there goes into more like fruitful. So it's basically like that location or that region that they were in. Once again, Samaria being that capital, right? It was placed in you could think of it like a fruitful region. And the fat valleys of them that are overcome with wine, right? So the inhabitants there were also subject to that because the rulers were like that. Right, and by that I mean going in the wrong ways, and that's what it means by being overcome with wine. Verse 2: Behold, the Lord Yahweh hath a mighty and strong one, which as a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, as a flood of mighty waters overflowing, shall cast down to the earth with the hand. And this mighty one is basically a form of judgment, but more so an adversary or a foreign nation, all right, that the Lord has raised up to basically come and cast down the Northern Kingdom here to the earth, right? Meaning to bring them down. Now, in terms of real life, that's when a nation comes over and takes over, right? Whether it's by siege or whatnot. And in this case, we know historically that this was the Assyrians that the Lord set up, which here were likened unto a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, right? So if you've ever seen like a hailstorm, it's pretty deadly, right? It can break glass, it can even kill people, the size of that hail with the speed at which it's dropping. And the Lord likened this mighty one, this strong one, or this foreign adversary onto that, right? As a flood of mighty waters overflowing shall cast down to the earth with the hand. And that, when you research the Assyrians, they were a pretty ruthless people, right? But also they had a strong dominion that they ruled with, at least in their time. So when you look at the history as to when they came against the Northern Kingdom was overcome by them, right, and couldn't resist them. Verse 3, the crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim shall be trodden under feet. And basically that's what ended up happening and resulted in them being taken captive. And the glorious beauty, which is on the head of the fat valley, shall be a fading flower. So Isaiah is just reiterating what he said in the verses above, to say that you know, at one point you were up there, right? But now when the judgment comes, you're going to wither away like a dying flower. It says here, and as a hasty fruit before the summer. Now, a hasty fruit typically would be something like a fig, right, that grows before the rest of the harvest. And so, as it says, as a hasty fruit before the summer, which when he that looketh upon it seeth it, while it is yet in his hand, he eateth it up. And what that is to say, that typically when people saw those fruits like that fig, for example, that was nice and ripe before the harvest time, they were quick to pluck it and to eat it. Okay, and so I think it'd be a bit clearer if I pull this up in the NLT, for example. It sits at the head of a fertile valley, but its glorious beauty will fade like a flower. Whosoever sees it will snatch it up, and, as an early fig is quickly picked and eaten. And that was going to be the fate of Ephraim here, right, which represents the Northern Kingdom. It would be like that fig, which when spotted would immediately be grabbed up and eaten. Okay, and in this case, you know, it represented that inevitable consumption that would come upon them because of their disobedience. Verse 5, in that day shall the Lord Yahweh of hosts be for a crown of glory. So in the first 4 verses, right, Isaiah initially addresses and pronounces judgment against Ephraim. And then in the subsequent verses, you notice, right, it says in that day. So now he's referring basically in other words, he's saying there's going to come a time where the Lord of hosts shall be for a crown of glory and for a diadem of beauty onto the residue of his people. And the residue of his people would be the remnant or the elect, right? So those that would remain because they kept their faith and their trust in Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. The Lord would be to them, starting with them, right? Eventually it would spread to the whole nation. But starting with them, the Lord would be like that beauty, right? That majesty, that glory, right? The Lord would basically bless Israel and glorify them. And it likens him being onto like that crown of glory, because it's a glorious thing, right? If you're crowned, right? Or what they call it, the coronation. Verse 6, and for a spirit of judgment to him that sitteth in judgment, and for a spirit of strength to them that turn the battle in the gate. So in other words, in verses 5 and 6, Isaiah is saying here that, right, there's going to come a time where the Lord is he's basically going to deliver Israel, right, and be, you know, make them glorious again, right, and also bring forth justice through them and strength. So that spirit of judgment to him that sitteth in judgment, him that sitteth in judgment would be likened unto a judge. And the spirit of judgment would be the spirit to properly discern and rightfully judge, that the Lord will put upon the judges of Israel to basically be, you know, to judge right and accurately. And that would bring forth what? Justice and peace. Continuing in verse 6, and for strength to them that turn the battle in the gate. So basically the warriors, right? If you think of like a ancient city, you would have the people, right? But you would also have guards, you would also have warriors, where if there was war, you know, they would basically defend, because the gate would be like the entrance into the city. So they would have to defend the people, right? Should there be a battle that drew near to the city, and basically try to fend off the enemies and drive them back. So that's why it mentions them that turn the battle to the gate. So the Lord will be a strength, right, onto them. So there's three main points here Isaiah is mentioning, right? That glory, that judgment, and that strength or that power. And this will really manifest in that day being prophetic, but being the last days, right? When Yahushua comes back, beginning when he comes back and delivers his elect. They will be the residue of the Lord's people. Verse 7, but they also have erred through wine. So now he jumps back in terms of the context or the focus, going snapping back to reality, right, to his present time, that they have erred through wine and through strong drink are out of the way. Now, wine and strong drink, right, as we mentioned, are here metaphorical or representation of doctrine or philosophies or a way of life. And why? Why is wine likened onto that? Whether it's philosophies on the left hand or the right hand, because similar to how wine or alcohol or strong drink influences you, right? It can alter your mindset and the decisions you make and how you perceive things. Some people get too drunk and they become very rowdy, right? And they're quick to fight and argue or whatever the case is. They're not really themselves. And it's similar when somebody starts to follow a philosophy or a way of life or a doctrine, right? It alters their perception and how the decisions they end up making change based on how they were before until after they got into those ways. And if we look up here, let me see if I just look up philosophy. Let's see what it says here. Let's do it this way. What is a philosophy? Let's see. Okay, so it says here, I'm just going to read this part. Philosophy at its core is the love of wisdom, encompassing, and then there's different types of wisdom, which we know, the pursuit of fundamental truths about existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. It involves using reason and logic to analyze how humans experience the world, understand the language we use to describe it, and our place within it. Essentially, it's a systematic inquiry into basic questions about reality and our place in it. But you get the sense of how it has come to be used, right? Which is like a doctrine or a belief, okay? And so going back to Isaiah 27:8, understanding why wine in the scriptures is sometimes likened onto a belief or a way of living, here them erring through wine and through strong drink is by introduction to a different way of living outside of what the Most High has ordained us to live by, right? The law, statutes, and commandments. They erred, right? They started to err in judgment, in actions, in words, in deed, okay, in faith. And that's why it mentions them being out of the way. The way here would be the way of truth or the way of righteousness. The priest and the prophet have erred through strong drink. So the priests, which were set up to serve Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, right, to basically perform the proper sacrifices and also lead the people the right way, and the prophets, which were to give them the divine message from the Lord, right, correct them when they were going off and so on and so forth, they have all erred. So rather than performing the sacrifices and instances for the Lord, they do it for idols, right, or for the heathen gods. And likewise, the prophets also, by following in these ways, have become more so false prophets, right, that prophesy vain things and lies and deceits. They are swallowed up of wine. So to be swallowed up of wine, meaning they're totally consumed by these ways or these philosophies, doctrines, however you want to call it, right, which are not the right form of wisdom. They are out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment, right? Which is basically the same point reiterated again. Now, Isaiah, though we know that Isaiah is basically using like a metaphor here to describe the state of the people, that metaphor, still needs to be understood, right? And so going into verse 8, as it says, "For all tables are full of vomit and filthiness, so that there is no place clean." It's going still with that metaphor of being drunk, right? So like how an actual drunk person is and behaves is likened onto how they're behaving, though they're not literally drunk, right? But you could say spiritually drunk. Now, when you drink, right, as it mentions, all tables are full of vomit and filthiness, right? Because when you drink too much, you throw up. And the reason people throw up when they drink too much is because there's something, see if I can find, forgot the term for it. Is it chemoreceptor? Yeah, CTZ, chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is a part of your brain that basically detects when there's too much toxins within your body, and then it triggers the part of your the part that makes you throw up, and so you vomit it to basically clear out those toxins out of your body. And obviously, when you drink alcohol, that the acidity and the toxins build up, right? So here it says the chemoreceptor trigger zone, or CTZ, also known as the area postrema, is a specific area in the brain that plays a key role in triggering the vomiting reflex. It's located outside of the brain, the blood-brain barrier, making it sensitive to circulating substances like toxins and drugs. When activated, the CTZ sends signals to the vomiting center in the brainstem, initiating the process of vomiting. So that's like naturally, right, which is beautiful how the Lord set up the human body, but naturally that's what will happen when you're consumed with wine, right, or strong drink. And so you would, just as you would vomit in the literal sense, here the vomit is a representation of what comes out of them, right? So by them being consumed by these false ways and these vain philosophies that they now follow, abandoning the ways of the Lord, they have vomited, right, and filthiness, which is basically now how they judge the people, right? The new ways they introduce to the people, the forms of idolatry, right? The wickedness that they condone. This is likened onto the vomit that has come out of them by being consumed by that wine or that strong drink. And that's why it mentions, right, all tables are full of vomit and filthiness. That's like the visual here that's being painted in the minds of the listeners or the readers here, so that there is no place clean. So pretty much if you went throughout the land, right, all you would see left and right is what can be classified as like vomit or filthiness, right? Ungodly ways, because they have been so consumed by this philosophical wine or this metaphorical wine. Verse 9, "Whom shall he teach knowledge? And whom shall he make to understand doctrine? Them that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breasts. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little." Now, in these verses here, in verses 9 and 10, and I guess also leading into verse 11, there's a couple of, I say like folds, right, to this here, right? We have the spiritual aspect to it, right, which is mainly when we go to Isaiah 28 and 9 and 10, just as a precept on its own without the context of the chapter, where it is understood in the sense of, right, whom shall he teach knowledge, in terms of like who will the Most High, ultimately teach this knowledge or this truth to, right, and make to understand this doctrine, would be those that are weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast, right? Which, when you go into Hebrews, I believe the 5th chapter, it mentions that the beginning and the foundation is the milk, right? You have to basically start with the milk, which are the basics of the scriptures, and then you start to work your way up to where, the Lord starts to sup with you and give you, a deeper understanding of the scriptures, right? And truly open up your mind to fully understand the deeper parts of the doctrine and the scriptures. And then flowing into verse 10, which goes into more so how the scriptures really should be read in order to understand the doctrinal message within it, right? Because you can read from cover to cover, right, from Genesis to Revelation, but when you are trying to understand the doctrine, right, the true message in the scriptures, other than just the context or the story, you have to get a precept from one part, right, and then a precept from another, and then you put it together to give the whole picture, right? Some parts from maybe this book and then that book. So you'll notice, like, when we're teaching, especially when we're out in the highways and byways, or even in these lessons, right, we'll oftentimes get a verse from here, then get another verse from a different book, a different chapter, that basically support each other to give you the full message there, right? So that's that. That is that a layer, right, of Isaiah 28 and 9 and 10. And then there's also the other part of it, which is more in terms of the actual context of the chapter. And when you look at Isaiah 28 and 9 and 10 in the context of the chapter, this is actually basically the Israelites, right, these leaders here mocking Isaiah, right, based on basically how he was teaching or rebuking them. Okay, and to make it clearer, I'll pull this up in another translation, and then I'll get a precept that is somewhat similar to this. So Isaiah 28 and 9, if we pull up Bibles, we'll see many other translations here. But in the NLT, for example, it says, it says here, who does the Lord think we are? They ask. Why does he speak to us like this? Are we little children just recently weaned? Who is he trying to teach, right? NIV, who is he trying to teach? To whom is he explaining this message? To children weaned from the milk, or to those just taken from the breast? So, in other words, as Isaiah was prophesying to them, basically it's like he was going back to the basics of what the ordinances or the principles of the laws are that you're not supposed to be doing. They took it as condescending, right, as offensive to them. Like, who do you think you're? Because remember, he was addressing the priests, he was addressing the princes, he was addressing those on high. So their response or their attitude towards it was like, who do you think you're talking to? Like, are we, you're talking like we just came out of kindergarten, like we don't know what we're doing, right? And here it is, you got to break it down to us little, and that's what goes into verse 10, that precept upon precept, precept upon precept. And that's basically a part of their mocking, saying like, are we like, we just came out of kindergarten, that you got to break it down to us like precept, then this line, then this line, and here a little, then you got to go here a little, then you break it down here, as if we don't know, we don't know any better. And that was sort of the mocking spirit or energy that they responded or scorned against Isaiah with, as he was prophesying onto them. Okay, and I also look up this this here and the other translations here. NLT, for example, right? He tells us everything over and over, one line at a time, a little here and a little there, right? NIV, for it is do this, do that, a rule for this, a rule for that, a little here, a little there, right? CSB, law after law, law after law, line after line, line after line, a little here, a little there. So it's like, this is something that you would do. Like if you go back to ancient Israel, when you had, the reason they mentioned weaned from the milk and drawn from the breast is like when you had like children, they would actually be taught, the way they learned how to read and write was via the scriptures, right? So their comprehension, grammar, history, it was all the context of that was all based in the scripture. So as they learned how to read and write and do all these things, they also learned their history. They learned about the Lord and so on and so forth, right? But they would be taught precept upon precept, line upon line, this here and that there. Okay, so in the context of the chapter, this was like these Israelites mocking Isaiah, right, or scorning against him because of him reproving them and breaking it down to them, down to the basics, because they should know better, right? But they weren't doing the things that they should have been doing. So verse 11, as it says, for with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people. And once again, in the in the spiritual understanding of this, right, the stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people is ultimately it's happening now, right? Because that's what we're doing, right? When we're prophesying to them, we're not necessarily prophesying to Israel in Hebrew, right? And we're not, the best orators in the world, okay? But the Lord is still sending us out here to prophesy unto them. But in the context of the chapter, right, going back to that time, when you go into the word stammering, he, as it says, things la'ag, mocking, right? And so, as it says here, for with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to this people. And this was sort of like a response, right? So the Lord has sent his prophet out here to warn you, and your response is to mock him. So since you don't want, this is too plain for you, this is too basic for you, and you see that with Jake today, right? It's too simple for them, right? They always have to overcomplicate it. It's not enough. It has to have a deeper meaning. But the Lord's response is basically, well, since you want to scorn at this and it's too basic for you, then, with the same energy, that same scorning and mockery that you are coming against my prophet with, that is the same sort of way that you're going to now hear my judgments, right, or my message to you. And then it further, the Lord sort of further expounds upon this energy down to verse 13. Right, so verse 12, it says, to whom he said, this is the rest wherewith ye may cause the weary to rest, and this is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. Right, so the Lord said that by way of his prophets. So the prophets, by coming and reproving and rebuking them, was to show them the way that they should go in, that would bring them rest, right? That would bring them refreshing. But they would not hear that. Instead, they wanted to go after, as the scripture say, they wanted to be wise in their own eyes. Slack here. So verse 13, but the word of the Lord Yahweh was unto them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little and there a little. So the same way that they mocked the words of the Lord by Isaiah as it's precept upon precept, is this upon this, and line upon line, like we're not kids, like who do you think you're trying to teach that? The Lord said, oh, okay, so I'll have the actual judgments, right, come upon you precept upon precept and line upon line, and here a little and there a little, that they might go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. So that's how the judgments that the Lord had pronounced came upon them, right? This, then this, then this, just as it was prophesied. Okay, and the ultimate end of that was that, as it says, they may go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. And that manifested in the forms of the various, captivities at this point, starting with the Assyrian captivity, but also the famines, right? The pestilences. Some of these happened during the siege, right? Before they were actually sent captives, Samaria was besieged. So they starved in there, right? People died. People committed cannibalism. And then eventually, as it mentions, snared and taken, right? They were shackled up, they were captured, and they were taken captive and suffered other forms of the judgment that the Lord said would come upon them, for which they mocked. Verse 14, wherefore hear the word of the Lord Yahweh, ye scornful men. See? So that's why Isaiah is referring to them as scornful men. And when you go into the word scornful, Oh, and I'll also come back here. I forgot I had this precept on deck. But you have here scorning, bragging, and looking into the Hebrew Chaldee lexicon, right? It says mocking or frivolous, contempt of what is good and upright. And that's exactly what they were doing. And that's why Isaiah referred to them as scornful men. Now, before we continue here, I just want to jump to 2 Corinthians 10, just to get an example, right, of what I just mentioned here, where, like the Apostle Paul in his writing, also sort of references like how some individuals received or perceived or even spoke about him or his writings. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10 or verse 9. It says here, that I may not seem as if I would terrify you by letters. For his letters, say they, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. So keep in mind that it's not that every time the prophets went out there and prophesied and spoke, that it was always well received. In fact, there are more people that didn't receive it than those that did. But just like today, people scorn, scoff, and mock the words of the Lord, and today they do responses to it. All right. Back then they did the same thing, right? They spoke behind the backs of the prophets. They spoke towards their face. They mocked them. They did the same things. From the time of Isaiah, from the time before him, all the way to the time of Yahushua, to Paul, to us now, it's the same people doing the same things. The difference is now that the Lord is going to put an end to it by way of severe judgment. So back in verse 14 in Isaiah 28, wherefore hear the word of the Lord Yahweh, ye scornful men that rule this people which is in Jerusalem, because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. Now, keep in mind that Isaiah had a ministry, right? So Isaiah, Isaiah wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to the people to which the Lord sent him to talk to prophesy against. And so when you read in these chapters, Isaiah, the author, oftentimes also mentions the responses, the energy, the mindset. Like, this is what these people are saying as I'm telling them this, right? This is how they're going about. This is what they think about it. And it's the same thing today. When we go out there and we prophesy to our people, we hear what they say, whether it's to our face or they do TikTok videos or Instagram, whatever the case is on it. We hear what they think because they say it. They commit it to video. And we get a sense of what their reaction and responses are. It's the same thing. So Isaiah is saying here, well, these people are saying, right, as I'm warning them of judgment to come, they're saying, because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell are we at agreement. Now, this is not literal. They didn't actually make they didn't literally make a covenant with death. But what they were saying here is, we're going to be okay. When this judgment, right, the overflowing scourge that you are saying is going to come upon us, and that is going to get us, and we're going to do this and that, we're going to be all right when that happens. Don't worry. Whether be it the Assyrians or whatever other form of judgment you're talking about, we're going to be fine. And so this covenant, right, that they made very likely was either some deals with Egypt, right, or some neighboring nation that they could be able to withstand when the Assyrians would come against them, right? So they thought that by carnal means and agreements that they've done, that when, this judgment was to come, they'll find a way around it. They'll be okay. They'll be able to escape it. So as it says, it shall not come unto us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. Now, obviously, from their perspective, they're not going to say they've made lies their refuge, right? No, they're not going to openly admit that because they don't perceive it as that. But Isaiah is basically saying here, right? Your means of refuge, your means of hiding yourself is really just lies and falsehood. Okay? So the things by which you think you're good and you're secure, for example, I'll give you a modern day example. We tell people today about the things to come and so on. And in their minds, they're thinking, well, as long as I comply, right? Or as long as I just get my money, or I got the bag, or I got this tool on me, ain't nothing gonna happen to me. Step to me and find out. And we'll explain to them that bro, your gun with like 3 bullets in there, it's not gonna do you any good. Right? You don't even know how to shoot it. And if the Lord was to bring a famine or a disease, what are you gonna shoot that? So it's vain, right? It's false. It's a deceptive. It's deception that you think you're safe by, and it's like an ancient equivalent to which they were, Israelites back then, they were thinking and doing, right? In their mind, they thought they could escape the judgment of the Lord by their carnal means. Verse 16, therefore, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, behold, I lay in Zion for a foundation, a stone, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. He that believeth shall not make haste. Once again, so now Isaiah he's mentioning something that might not be directly related to the preceding verse, but here he's speaking about Yahushai, right? And Yahushai, the way the Lord said, like when he said, behold, I lay in Zion a foundation, for a foundation, a stone, meaning that Yahushua was going to come on the scene because he is that stone, right? He is that precious cornerstone. He is that foundation. So the Lord was saying here by the mouth of Isaiah that there's going to come a point where he's going to send this Yahushua. And when that happens, those that believe upon him, as it says here, shall not make haste, though I think in this verse, the proper, to get the proper sense of it, looking at another translation might be better. Like and NKJV works, right? But NLT also works as well, NIV as well. Specifically this last part, whosoever believes need never be shaken, right? Or whosoever relies on it will never be stricken with panic. And that's Yahushua, right? So those that put their trust in Yahushua, the scriptures say, was it Isaiah 26, that thou will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed upon thee. That's how you believe. Because if this was an actual physical stone, believing in an actual stone, a physical stone, that's not even right, right? Because technically that's idolatry. That's what these heathens do. They build their gods out of these stones and trees, and then they worship it. So clearly we know this stone is not an actual physical stone, but it's a representation of Yahushua. And having that faith and belief in him will keep you stable. So it means by not making haste. Verse 17, judgment also judgment also will I lay to the line, and righteousness to the plummet. Now the line and the plummet, right? I think when we went in the book of Kings, the Lord used a similar reference, and these were used to measure. Sometimes it was measured like for construction, right? It would measure straightness. So if there's a wall and you want to find out how straight the wall is, right, you could use that line or that plummet. Let me actually see if we can get something, some extra context off here. Line, let's see what they got. All right, so line, usually of a measuring line. Other Hebrew words simply mean cord or thread. The line as measure suggests rule of conduct, right? For a line, yada yada. Right. So the point here is that this line and this plummet, just as it is used to actually measure, accuracy or straightness, the Lord would use it as he mentioned, judgment will he lay to the line and righteousness to the plummet, to measure the righteousness or the deeds that are done amongst his people. by which he would bring judgment upon them. Okay. It says, and the hail shall sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters shall overflow the hiding place. So Isaiah is likening the judgment of the Lord to like that hailstorm that we read up above, or like this overflowing water, like a tsunami or a flood, that would come upon them and wipe away the refuge of lies and the hiding place, that they had so much confidence in, thinking that that would help them escape from whatever judgment would come to them. Verse 18, and your covenant with death shall be disannulled. So it'll be no more, right? What you think is a covenant with death that will protect you or absolve you from your iniquities, that you may survive what's coming, that's all going to be done away with. And your agreement with hell, which death, hell, well, really hell goes into the grave, and when you die, you go into the grave, shall not stand. So having an agreement with hell is basically having you've put measures in place that you believe will preserve you from death. Now, I'm not talking about immortality, but in the sense of what happens when a foreign nation comes to your borders and they're coming to basically take over your land. There's going to be death. There's going to be captivity, eventually resulting in death. Their minds were, oh, we have deals, we have alliances, we have things we've put in place that we're going to be good when this comes to pass. And Isaiah is telling them, guess what? All that is not going to do anything for you. It's not going to stand. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, then ye shall be trodden down by it. So when that judgment comes through, it's going to get you. Okay, you're going to be completely subject to it. From the time that it goeth forth shall it take you. For morning by morning shall it pass over, by day and by night, and it shall be a vexation only to understand the report. And here he is emphasizing the judgment, okay, that it's going to be like a unrelenting judgment that you will not be able to escape from. As it says, from the time that it goeth is going to take you, from the morning all the way up until the night, you're going to be subject to this, right? There's going to be no break in between. No, let's take a second and reconvene. None of that. And it shall be a vexation only to understand the report, meaning just hearing the news alone is going to be it's going to cause you to tremble. When you go into that word vexation, it goes into that, like being afraid. Verse 20, for the bed is shorter than a man can stretch himself on it, and the covering narrower than he that can wrap himself in it. And this is signifying their covenant or their refuge, right? To say that the means by which you think you're going to deliver yourself is likened onto a bed that's so short that you can't even sleep properly upon it. Imagine trying to sleep on a bed that's like, it's not even a couch, it's just a short ass bed. You know, your knees are hanging off, your arms are falling off the bed. You know, if you twitch the slightest, you're already falling off of that. Okay, or imagine it's super cold in the winter, and you got a blanket the size of a t-shirt that you can't even fully cover yourself. And it doesn't matter if you curl up into a ball, your feet are still exposed, your toes are freezing, right? The tips of your ears are all frozen. So that's likening this, basically like it's not enough. It's not going to do it for you. Same thing. Same way their whatever means they took that they thought will preserve them wouldn't be enough. It'd be like, once again, trying to sleep on a short ass bed. Verse 21, for the Lord Yahweh shall rise up in Mount Perazim. He shall be wroth as in the valley of Gibeon. Now here Isaiah is making reference to historical times, right? Which I believe in Mount Perazim was I think it was during the time of David when the Lord helped us against the Philistines. And I believe the valley of Gibeon might have been during the time of Joshua. Or let me see. Let's look up some of these other translations. They put that in there. Okay, so here's one. NKJV. For the Lord will rise up as at Mount Perazim. He will be angry as in the valley of Gibeon. NLT, the Lord will come up as he did against the Philistines at Mount Perazim and against the Amorites at Gibeon. And I'm pretty sure when you cross-reference this, it'll give you the time periods of when this happened, right? In Mount Perazim, going to 2 Samuel, 1 Chronicles, the account is over there. And when you go into the book of Joshua, you have the account here of what happened over there in Gibeon. So basically similar to how the Lord took action back there, right? He is, as it says, for he shall rise up as in Mount Perazim, he shall be wroth as in the valley of Gibeon. So during those times, the Lord was angry with the heathens and defended us. And right, once again, I got to refresh my memory on exactly how those accounts went. But as it says, the Lord is going to rise up like he did then. But this time when he does, it's so that he may do his work, right? His strange work, and bring to pass his act, his strange act. And this was something that was also similarly said or pointed to by, I believe it was Habakkuk. Behold, I work a work in your days, which they will not believe, though it be told you. And then he referenced bringing the Chaldeans against them. Okay. So this strange work the Lord was going to do would ultimately be a judgment that they hadn't seen at least before in their time. Verse 22, now therefore be ye not mockers, lest your bands, right, or your bonds, okay, or restraints be made strong. For I have heard from the Lord Yahweh of hosts a consumption, even determined upon the whole earth. And we know that the word earth in the Hebrew is aratazar, which means land. So Isaiah wasn't referring to the entire planet. Okay, and this consumption would be that overflowing judgment that the Lord was going to bring upon them. Okay, which, though he was referencing them, this is still something that is applicable to today. Except, the land that the consumption would come upon would be really wherever Israel is at. Okay, and ultimately we know, right, in prophecy, you're going to have that one mainland, which is Babylon, be ultimately consumed. Okay, but here Isaiah is telling them, like, all this mocking, right, this wickedness that you're doing, you're wrong, right? You're already going off. Just chill out, repent, because if not, the Lord is just going to make it worse for you. Because he's already planned judgment that's about to come upon you. Verse 23, give ye ear and hear my voice, hearken and hear my speech. And now in the latter verses, Isaiah gives this example here, or reference to a husbandman, right, who is like plowing and so on. But he does this to highlight the wisdom of the Lord, right? To say that when you look at, and I'm going to read it, but when you look at these things that this husbandman does in the process of planting and harvesting, and how you go from from the seed to the actual resource that you can use to make food and so on, the way that he knows to do that is because of the wisdom that the Lord has put in his mind. So it is the same God, right? It's not because this husbandman is so wise of his own or so cunning, but because of the wisdom the Lord has put upon him. The same Lord that you're mocking against, thinking you're going to have a way to escape when he brings his calamities and his judgments upon you. So you had better, think twice about that and not make an enemy out of this God. Because not only is he a God of judgment, but a God of wisdom. So you're not going to be able to outsmart the Most High. Verse 25, when he hath made, Slaki, verse 24, doth the plowman plow all day to sow? Doth he open and break the clods of the ground? Now, Isaiah is asking rhetorical questions here, but the way it's worded in the Old English might not be entirely clear. When he says, doth the plowman plow all day to sow? What he is saying here is, does the plowman just plow all day without sowing? Right? Or does he just break up the clods of the ground, meaning when they use the plow and they dig it into the ground and they have the oxen move it, is to drag, is to break the ground to make space so they can plant the seeds. So Isaiah is saying here, basically, do you ever see a plowman just plow every day and just like open up the ground and that's it? He just never plants the seeds, but he just goes on plowing. So as it says here in NLT, does a farmer always plow and never sow? Is he forever cultivating the soil and never planting? And it's rhetorical. The answer is no. When he hath made plain the face thereof, doth he not cast abroad the fitches and scatter the cumin? Or the cumin, and cast in the principal wheat and the appointed barley and the rye in their place? Now, when you look at this word fitches, I believe it's a type of seed. Right, black cumin, a plant with small black acrid seeds used as condiment. So, as Isaiah is saying here, when he hath made plain the face thereof, meaning once he's cleared the land and he's made those furrows, doesn't he then cast abroad the fitches, right, to throw the seeds onto the land so it goes into the proper places, and scatter the cumin? And that's what they do, right? They throw the seeds on the ground, and then eventually, as it rains over it and everything, it starts to grow, right? Eventually it germinates, the plant grows, and yada yada, right? It says, and scatter the cumin and cast in the principal wheat. Now, and appoint barley and the rye in their place. So the seeds that grow into these crops, right? He plants the seeds after he has broken up the earth and prepared it. Verse 26, for his God doth instruct him to discretion and doth teach him, right? Meaning he knows to do this because the Most High has given him that understanding to do that, right? He didn't just wake up one day and just knew how to do it. These were things the Lord put into our minds, going all the way back to our forefathers, and taught them how to do these things. All right, how to till the land, so that we can basically sustain ourselves. Verse 27, for the fitches are not threshed with a threshing instrument, neither a cart wheel turned about upon the cumin, but the fitches are beaten out with a staff, and the cumin with a rod. So this farmer, or this husbandman, has enough wisdom which has been given him of the Lord to know that the fitches and the cumin, they're delicate in terms of the seed. So during the harvest time, when you are on the threshing floor, you don't use like a sled, right, or a heavy threshing instrument to thresh or to break up and basically get the husk off of the seed, because you might crush the seed because it's delicate, right? Same way, right? He's not going to use a cart, as it says, cartwheel turned about with the cumin. So one other means of threshing or getting the grain out of its shell or its husk was by having a cart, which was driven by an oxen or some strong animal around in circles on the threshing floor. And as the cart would go, it would run over the whatever it is, whatever substance it is, breaking it up and eventually removing the husk off of it. Then they could gather the actual grain or the seed. But some seeds are more delicate than others, so it's not all of them that you would have an animal tread upon it, right, or a strong threshing instrument, but rather, as it says, the fitches are beaten out with a staff and the cumin with a rod. So there's a special kind of stick that they would use to hit upon the fitches and the cumin a certain way so that it doesn't crush it, right, or it doesn't destroy the actual substance that you need, or the grain. In verse 28, bread corn is bruised, because he will not ever be threshing it, nor break it with the wheel of his cart, nor bruise it with his horsemen. By his horsemen, it means the hooves of his horse. because that's what they also use some of the animal hooves for, to because it was strong, right? It's the animal hooves are very hard, and then plus the weight of the animal, with that on top of the, the grain or the crop, that's enough to break it up. But let me pull this up here. NKJV is good. I think NLT is also one. Let's see. Maybe let's take a look at the NLT. It says, grain for bread is easily crushed, so he doesn't keep on pounding it. He threshes it under the wheels of a cart, but he doesn't pulverize it, right? So it's just enough to get it to the state that he needs. But because it can be easily crushed, he has to be careful and that's why it says he doesn't bruise it with his horsemen, because if he was to use the hooves of the horse with its weight, it would crush it completely. Okay. So when it says nor break it with the wheel of a cart, meaning that he's not going to go overboard, with continuously going over it, lest he actually destroys the corn, the seed, whatever it is that he's looking for. Verse 29, this also cometh forth from the Lord of hosts, which is wonderful in what? In counsel, and excellent in working. So going back to the point that I highlighted before, the ability to know these things, that wisdom on how to do this and X, Y, and Z, all comes from the Lord. Okay, this is the wisdom of the Lord, the same Lord that you are, denying and turning away from the path he has set for you, and rather trying to think that you can outsmart and escape the judgments that he is going to bring. So you're better off repenting and turning back and seeking that mercy and forgiveness from the Lord. And this brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 28th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Rachak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.